My beautiful wife cheated on me with a younger man. To get back at her, I pretended that we were going bankrupt while keeping my money safe. She was afraid of giving up her high-class lifestyle, so she didn't even know that Miles Landon, with his smart business sense and quiet personality, had built a life that many people would envy. He was married to Eva, a woman whose beauty and charm seemed to complete this picture-perfect life. He owned a successful tech company and a lovely home in the suburbs. Miles had always thought that their marriage, like their yard, was well taken care of. It was a cool fall morning when his perfect world started to fall apart. Miles was on his way back from his usual jog when he saw his old neighbor Mr. Henderson working in the yard. The man slowed down and called out to him as he did so. "Miles, could I have a word?" Miles was interested in the old man because of the serious tone in his voice. He walked over while wiping the sweat off his forehead. "Yes, Mr. Henderson. Is everything okay?" The neighbor leaned in and looked around to make sure they were the only ones there. "I believed you should know. I saw a younger man come to your house during the day while you're at work. It looks like he and Eva are close." Miles felt like he was hit hard by the words. He felt a sudden disconnect, as if the peaceful scene in front of him, the well-kept grass and the soft morning sun, was just a show. "Are you sure?" he asked, keeping his voice calm even though he was upset. Mr. Henderson gave a serious nod. "If I wasn't, I wouldn't have said anything. I believed you should know." Miles felt a storm of feelings as he thanked him and walked back to his house: denial, anger, and betrayal. But most of all, a very bad feeling of being a fool. When he looked at his home, which he had built with love and hopes, it seemed strange. All day, Miles played over his marriage to Eva in his mind, looking for clues he had missed. He worked late nights, made plans with friends he had never met for the weekend, and they talked less. How could he have been so blind? When Eva got home that night, Miles looked at her with a new viewpoint. Her smile was warm, and her laughter filled the room. She looked beautiful as ever. Now, though, it all seemed like a show. The dinner was quiet, and Miles replied to Eva's small talk with grunts that didn't mean anything. He was thinking. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she chose not to. Later, when he was lying next to her in bed, Miles felt like they were very far apart. He looked at her while she slept and saw that her face was calm and peaceful, which was very different from the storm in his heart. He decided right then that he would not talk to her about it yet. He had to make a plan or a strategy. Eva could have played a game, but he would have made sure she couldn't win. The next morning, Miles felt like he had a goal to reach. He would keep up the appearance that they were happy together while he thought about what to do next. Like always, he kissed Eva goodbye for a little longer and then went to work. He had a clear head, the game had started, and he was ready to do well. A skill that had helped him do well in business, Miles had always been proud of his ability to think carefully. Now that he was navigating the rough seas of his personal life, he knew it was time to use the same strategies at home. The plan was easy to understand and brave. He would act like a man who was about to lose all his money. The lie's seed was planted over breakfast. "Eva," Miles told her, "there's been a big loss in one of our big investments." He gave her a practiced worried look. "Eva, it's really bad." He carefully watched how she responded. There was a flash of fear, but it was quickly covered up by a mask of support. "We'll get through this, Miles," she told him, putting her hand on his across the table. In the weeks that followed, Miles skillfully made up his story about how bad his finances were. He talked about debt, the chance of going bankrupt, and losing the house. Eva's behavior slowly changed. The warmth she had faked began to fade, and she was replaced by a cold, detached politeness. She talked on the phone more, and when she thought Miles wasn't hearing her, she would whisper. In the meantime, Miles was busy planning how he would get back at them. He met with his lawyer and financial advisor to make sure that his assets were safely moved to a private account and to set up a big gift to a charity with the agreement that the donor would remain anonymous. His public picture as a businessman who was having trouble making ends meet was very different from how well off he really was financially. The show at home kept going. It was clear that Eva's patience was wearing thin. She wasn't showing love as much as she used to. She began asking them in a sneaky way about their money, digging for information about their bank accounts and investments. Miles gave her hazy, non-committal answers that made her even more angry. Eva's phone rang with a message during one of these tense talks. She took a quick look at it, and for a split second, her tough exterior showed that she was excited. Miles took note of this, and his assumption that she was having an affair grew. He thought that her lover probably didn't know about the money scheme Miles was planning, which Miles could use to his advantage. As the lie that they were broke hurt their marriage, Miles saw a change in Eva's behavior toward her boyfriend. She kept things to herself more, and her meetings got more regular, but they also got more desperate. It was clear that she was trying to protect her future, which was unclear because Miles was said to be losing money. Miles felt a mix of happiness and sadness every night as he lay in bed next to Eva. He felt happy that his plan was working and sad that the love that had been real but was now hidden under lies and betrayal. That part was still to come, but he was ready for it. The stage was set, and Eva would soon have to deal with the results of what she did. Miles had worked hard to make it look like they were broke, but as fall turned into winter, their once-warm home started to feel cold. Eva's mood had changed from one of faraway worry to palpable stress. The fancy life she had become used to was now in danger, and her act of being faithful to her husband started to fall apart along with it. In the meantime, Miles was doing a great job with his part. He gave the impression of a man who was heavy with his mistakes. People often saw him going over bills and fake bank records with a worried look on his face. The outside world saw him as a businessman having a tough time, but on the inside, he was a mastermind moving his chess pieces around a board that he had made himself. Every time Miles and Eva talked, you could tell they were under a lot of stress. People were having tense conversations about money or the lack of it. When Eva looked at him, Miles saw that her eyes had changed. There was once love, or at least the appearance of it. Now there was cold calculation, as if she were trying to figure out what she could recover from their sinking ship. Miles saw a change in the trend on one of these tense nights. Eva got a call, and because she thought Miles was busy, she answered quietly but quickly. Miles could only hear bits and pieces of the discussion from where he was, but it was enough. Her voice had a hint of begging in it, which was very different from the sure, calm woman he had married. In the end, Miles put together the truth about Eva's affair by carefully watching and asking a few quiet questions. Miles is older and more experienced than her boyfriend, so it was clear that she didn't like how things turned out. He got involved with Eva because he thought she was wealthy and stable, not because he was in financial trouble. Miles saw Eva get more and more desperate as she tried to keep her lover interested. She would get dressed for him the same way she did for Miles. She would leave the house smelling like expensive perfume, which was very different from how they were living, which was becoming more and more cheap. But her lover stopped coming over as often and took longer to answer her texts. The act of their affair was starting to fall apart under the weight of truth. Miles thought about how funny everything was in the peace and quiet of his study. He wanted to show how shallow Eva's love was, but he found that her lover's love was just as shallow. The truth hurt him and made him feel like his win was empty. The atmosphere in the Landon home got colder, both physically and figuratively, as Christmas got closer. There weren't any of the fancy decorations or expensive gifts that were present this year. Instead, there were simple decorations and a feeling of loss. Miles knew that the last part of his plan was getting close when he was by himself. He had seen Eva's front fall apart, and her world, which had been stable before, became unstable and unsure. Everything was ready for the final revelation, the hard, unbending truth to come out. As it started to snow outside, covering everything in white, Miles got ready to end their unhappy winter. The winter was harsh, just like the cold reality that had settled over the land and the house. Eva's mood was getting more and more down as the facade of their lavish lifestyle fell apart. It was clear that she and Miles were upset with each other. The cold air of their home from the war was making a storm that they couldn't hear. Miles felt the weight of his lie, since he was the one who planned it. He carried it with a stiff upper lip because he knew his complicated plan was almost over. Eva was having a hard time with her relationship with him and her affair. It seemed like she was losing her life in the fight. In the early hours of the new year, Eva finally broke the ice between them. She sat across from Miles in their poorly lit living room one night. Her eyes no longer sparkled like they used to, which drew him in. "I want a divorce, Miles," she said in a voice that was barely above a whisper but sounded very firm. Miles looked at her, but she couldn't make out his face. His voice was cool as he asked, "Are you sure that's what you want, Eva?" "Yes," she said, raising her voice. "I can't keep living this way. I want to leave." Miles gave her a slow nod, quietly agreeing with her choice. "All right, Eva. Tomorrow, I'll call the lawyer. Then we can talk about the money matters." Eva's eyes lit up with a hint of joy, maybe because she thought they were about to go bankrupt and had to leave. But that happiness didn't last long. As they sat in Miles' lawyer's office the next day, the truth came out. Miles told them that their financial ruin was the result of a carefully planned lie. He talked about how he had put a lot of his money into a secret account and set aside a big chunk of it for charity. Eva sat there in silence, her face showing that she couldn't believe what she was seeing. It was hard for her to accept that she had been beaten at her own game and that her selfish choices had brought about her fate. After she was shocked, she realized what had happened, and then she felt bad about what she had done. But he knew that this moment was going to happen anyway. He felt sad about what could have been. The breakup process was easy to understand. Eva got a fair deal, but it wasn't even close to the luxurious life she had grown used to. In keeping with his promise, Miles gave a lot of his money to charity, which made the news for his good deeds. Miles felt like the case was over when he walked out of the lawyer's office. He was glad that the game was over because it meant the end of a part of his life. In the weeks that followed, Eva tried to get in touch with him, maybe to make things right or just to end the matter. But Miles knew that some bridges could not be rebuilt after they were destroyed by fire. He moved on and focused on his job and his new role as a generous person. Miles and Eva's breakup story spread like wildfire among their friends and family as a warning about love, betrayal, and what can happen when you choose to be selfish. As Miles started this new part of his life, he did so with a heart that was smarter but a little more hesitant than before. After the split, the Landon home, which had been very noisy before, was very quiet. This showed what a dramatic change had happened inside those walls. Now that Miles was by himself, the silence both woke him up and set him free. In these quiet times, he thought about the trip he had started, which had been full of pain, lies, and finally finding himself. As spring came, it brought new life to everything around him. In the same way, Miles felt like his life was starting over and had a meaning. He was slowly losing the anger that had been consuming him and replacing it with a newfound resolve to use what he had been through for a better good. Miles put all of his attention on his charitable work. He gave a lot of money to many causes, which made the news, but Miles didn't care about the praise. For him, it was about making a difference and using the pain of his past to give other people hope. As Miles did more charity work, he discovered a side of himself that he had been ignoring, a caring, sympathetic person who got pleasure from helping others. He went on trips, met people from different places, and worked on projects that included helping poor kids get an education and protecting the environment. Eva's path after her split, on the other hand, was very different. She had a hard time getting used to a simpler life after losing the wealth and position she had once loved. It was hard for her to accept that the choices she had made had brought about her failure. She tried to get in touch with Miles a few times to ask for forgiveness or maybe to understand, but Miles had closed that part of his life for good. People in the neighborhood where they used to be a power couple talked about how Eva had lost her job and how Miles had changed. Others felt sorry for her, while others respected him. But most were just interested in the drama. But Miles didn't pay much attention to what was being said. He had learned something important: life was too short to worry about what other people thought. He felt peaceful and like he had a reason for living like he never had before. Miles thought about how far he had come one day as he walked through a park where he and Eva used to go for walks. The sun was shining, the trees were in bloom, and he felt truly happy for the first time in a long time. He wasn't the same person who had planned to get back at his cheating wife. He had risen from the ashes of his old life to make something beautiful and important. Miles is seen watching the sun go down by a lake at the end of the story. It makes him think about the trip he's been on, the hurt, the betrayal, and the growth. He now knows that the hardest things in life are often the ones that change us the most. A gentle reflection of how pure and simple life is can be seen in the distance, where kids laugh and play. Miles smiles because he knows that even though the road ahead is uncertain, he is ready to face it with hope in his heart and a new energy in his body. The phoenix has risen, and a new start is on the way.